Hi everybody, my name's Nicola Thomas and we are back again for another episode of Fragrantica Talks, and I'm joined by Adam and John. Now today, we thought we'd try something a little bit different. So what I've done is I've put together a bunch of questions to put to my esteemed colleagues in the hopes that we'll get to know them a little bit better and get to know a little bit more about their perfume origins and where they've come from and the journey that's brought them here today. So I hope you'll stick with us for the next hour or so while we take a deep dive into John and Adam's dark perfumed pasts and see what skeletons we can uncover. So, guys, are you ready to be grilled?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
I'm ready. Yes.
By the way, I just have to say, I love being asked questions
Mhm.
because I've spent much of my career in journalism asking other people questions. So the idea of somebody just like throwing a bunch of things at me is like, oh, it's so not.
Well, I hope you've got your brain switched on because I've got a big list for you. All right then, Adam, let's start with you. What's your perfume origin story, or what is the first perfume you took an interest in?
Sure. Oh, I can pinpoint that exactly. It was imaginary authors, just a few of them. I think it was like Memoirs of a Trespasser. And I think I had maybe Every Storm a Serenade in the mix. And it was like a mix of like a little grab bag given to me. And it had those things in it. And then it also had Tom Ford and like a very old formulation of Noir de Noir, which like blew my mind. Yeah, it was just sort of given to me by somebody I was like driving to work every day in a carpool. So we were getting to know each other a lot during that time. And, I just asked him like, oh, what's something about you that kind of like this? I was just doing rapid fire get to know you questions. And it was like, what's one thing about you that I wouldn't know just by looking at you? And he said, I have 100 fragrances in my collection. And at the time, I thought that was insane. And it was mind blowing that somebody would have so many. And of course, I was thinking of like the mall fragrances that are really like noxious and predictable and like can be pretty intense if you don't really tend to like that stuff. So then he showed me these things, imaginary authors and Tom Ford's private collection, and I was like, wow, I didn't know fragrance could be like this. So that's where it all started.
Brilliant. What about you, John?
I'm going to say there was sort of two phases to this. So there was, when I was younger, much younger, and my mom and dad wore quite a lot of fragrance. My mom in particular. I would say in my younger years, I have a distinct memory of Chanel Pour Monsieur as being just like I don't know how I ended up with a bottle, but I did. And it just, it was so beautiful. It still is. I still have a bottle. I've had a bottle throughout most of my life, and it was just amazing stuff. And then I sort of was reintroduced to the world of fragrance again, by Fragrantica and, the wonders of the internet, being able to write reviews. But what sort of triggered my interest and knowledge of, and I have such a clear memory of this, of niche perfume, was the French brand Histoire de Parfum. And they had the most wonderful little sample package. And it was just, back when they were still just doing the years collection and the sort of famous people associated with the years. And what I loved about it is they had, do you know how you get when you want to build something, sometimes you get a how-to guide and it's printed on really thin paper, folded many times over. I've always loved the little booklets like that, because it's lots of text and stuff. And Histoire de Parfum used to have a little set of perfumes and this really big map of all the stuff in it, printed on very thin paper. And I just was so intrigued by, whoa, there's like these fragrances and they have years associated with them and a story and a historic person. And for me, it was the perfume 1969 that really just blew my mind. And I thought it was just so crazy out there. It was my first introduction really to the whole concept of a gourmand. Um, and the idea that this is what perfume could be, that it could have all of these other associated meanings. So that was sort of my real rebirth into perfume again.
Brilliant. And sticking with you, John, what's your favorite non-perfume smell?
Um, okay, I'm just gonna go straight from the hip. This is a weird one, but chlorine. The smell of chlorine, cool. Love that smell.
Yeah.
Love it.
What about you,
Yeah.
Adam?
Well, I didn't think of this immediately, but now that you mentioned chlorine, we had a pool growing up and we had lilacs growing outside that were really close to it. So the idea of chlorine plus lilac smell is a vivid memory for me, and I love that combination. So great choice, John. Um, for me, I think I grew up with a boat, and the boat was in salt water on the ocean, and it was an engine, but it wasn't a sailboat. It was an engine boat. So the idea of like the fumes from the engine kind of like rising up with the salt water is certainly not a soft smell. It was sort of an intense smell, but the combination is very vivid and very fascinating to me. So I feel comforted whenever I still live somewhat near the ocean. So, having the ocean smell is great in and of itself, but when you combine it with other signs of life, like engine oil or even just like a bakery, things that, show signs of like people being near the ocean. I love those combinations. Another
Mm.
great one was the smell outside of the Guinness factory in Dublin. I think I've mentioned that on the pod before. Uh, Unbelievable combination of scents there.
Mm. And what's your least favorite smell?
Oh man, that's a great question. I I really find myself put off by anything too like makeup-y,
Mm.
too powdery. You're like really any powdery scent except for, interestingly enough, baby powder. Don't mind that at all. Um, yeah, it's a hard one. Like there aren't too many smells that are just like, oh, this is rank for me. But I think obviously anything like old eggs or like old vegetables that have way past their prime and into the sludge territory, that's pretty offensive.
What about you, John?
I want to just preface that quickly by saying I think by, becoming as engaged with perfume as I have, my ideas of smells that I dislike are diminishing a lot. Like I'm learning to appreciate smells more and more. So this is a very funny question. I'd say that one smell I really don't like much is when, I think of it in summer, is that smell of just like tar being put on streets to repave it. There's something about that smell that I find, probably because it's usually combined with like car exhaust and like just that kind of oppressive ozone foolery type all at once. That
Mm.
type of combination of smell, I find kind of bad. Yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah. Like, it's really interesting to me, this question, because I've asked it a lot over the years, and nobody
Mm.
says bin juice. And bin juice is vile, particularly in summer. And also the smell of, because I've got a dog, hot dog poo bins. That is an unholy smell because it's kind of metallic as well as fecal. And oh god, and it's rank. And nobody ever mentions that. Maybe they're just too polite. Perhaps that's people think that they just don't say it. Unfortunately, like I do.
Yeah, I will add to that now that you mentioned this, I will add to that that when, in August, I quite often go to the state fair in Iowa. My brother lives in Iowa now with his wife. And all of there's a lot of animals at the state fair because it's a farm oriented type thing. And the animal smells they're just a normal part of the Midwest, but
Mm.
there's one particular smell that's bad, and that's goats. Goats
Mm.
do not smell good.
Mm.
They really don't. And it's interesting how where the goats are, the particular smell that comes from them. So I would say I do not like the smell of goats.
Yeah.
That's for
And actually, you're making me like riff off this as well because my mum lives in an area where there's a lot of chicken farms, and
Mm.
the chicken farms, it's a weird smell because you kind of get hot sawdust first, and you go, "Ooh, that's nice," and then there's this hideous chicken smell under it that kind of it almost comes like a little beat later, and so you go, "Ooh, ugh." 'Cause the rapid evolution of that is yeah. Anyway, onto a slightly less gross question. John, can a gourmand scent ever be chic?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I think that's been part of our change in our change in scent profiles. And I think a good example would be not that I personally necessarily think this is chic, but like look at something like Angel, which is just like pure sugar. But for a long time, that's been considered like a real sort of like going out at night kind of. For many years, that was considered quite a chic fragrance. And I think that the note, like caramel note, you find that has proliferated across perfume profiles, and particularly in fragrances marketed to women. That's now become a very important perfume profile note,
Mm.
and that's very gourmandy. In fact, that's like the height of gourmand, really, is something caramel, because it's both sweet and something you would eat. Like people love caramel. Oh, yeah. So yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Adam, anything to add to that?
Just look at any chocolatey patchouli scent. Many of those tend to be suave, sophisticated, a little touch of the gourmand with them as well. Some lean a little bit further into that, but I certainly think that anything that combines a sweet, like gourmand leaning notes with patchouli tends to do the trick in terms of being chic or suave or, attractive like that.
Yeah. And so moving on to your perfume collection, Adam, what's the oldest perfume in your collection?
Oh my Lord. It's okay. So like I'm probably gonna say something that hopefully many people watching can relate to. It's grown too large now, and that's not a good. And I don't, you know, eh, part of it is because we write about perfume on the side, so we tend to one way or another, whether we're buying them, we receive them, press samples, like that kind of thing. I have a lot of fragrances, all right, and I'm not necessarily proud of that. So like trying to recall, I mean, I'm happy with it, but I'm not proud of it. And so I'm trying to recall the oldest one. Actually, okay, no, I do have an obvious answer. It's my father, who's no longer with us. It's his old bottle of Geo F. Trumper's Eucharist that he must have had in like at least the early 2000s, if not the 90s or before. It might even be from like the late 80s, before I was even on this earth. So it's got to be the oldest one. Yeah.
Yeah. John, what about you?
Yeah. When you say oldest, you mean the oldest that we've had in our possession, like in our hands, or the oldest bottle?
I think either or, whichever you prefer.
Okay, interesting. So I'd say the oldest fragrance, and I could be wrong on this one, but the one that I remember buying first, and that would be in sort of my second wave of, as I was talking about before, my real gateway of buying stuff was I became really fascinated with Annick Goutal, and I remember the first that I bought for myself was Eau d'Adrienne, and that's probably the one I've replaced the most often. So that's probably the oldest one that I have in my collection. The oldest bottle is kind of funny. So I would say, I mean, I bought a few things at auction, and I just recently got a bottle of Maderas de Oriente by Meruja, the Spanish perfume company. However, I have a Roman glass perfume or unguent bottle, which I also bought, which is there's no perfume left in it. However, it is a perfume bottle and it is Roman, so I think that probably will win.
Trump most people. That's pretty neat, that is.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And bringing it more up to date, John, what's the last scent that you bought?
Oh goodness. I think the last thing I bought, God, what's the last thing I bought? This is going to be interesting. You know how sometimes you have big old gaps in your perfume collection? Like, whoa, how did I get by without owning this or not really wearing it often? So Guerlain's Heritage, never had it. And I know for some people, this is like, oh my God, how could you go throughout life without having this fragrance? And I remember the first time I met Sebastian Jara, the perfume reviewer online, he showed up wearing that, and I thought, oh God, that smells so good. And so it's been on a buy list forever. And yeah, that's the most recent thing I bought, and
Cool.
I haven't even cracked the seal yet.
What about you, Adam?
That'd be the bottle of Aqua Sextus that I photographed and used for my my article, my review about it recently. It's by Juliette Mad, and it's a wonderful, just like effervescent little aquatic, and it's great for anything above the current temperatures we're experiencing right now. So I'm excited to wear it a lot this year.
Yeah. And Adam, do you let your friends and family spray your perfumes?
Yeah. Not that they are clamoring on the door to do so. So for my wife, Shannon, she has her own little collection now, and it's like a few bottles. She really is fond of like the Marc Jacobs line, and would to a really understandable level. I mean, many of those fragrances are really well made. Um, so she has her own stuff to kind of mess around with, and I don't know if she'd really like many of the things that I treasure. I don't think it would be for her. Um, and then everybody else, if they come over and they're interested in it, I'll hop on that bandwagon and show me what you got. But if they did, I'd have a field day.
What about you, John?
Yeah, it's open to anybody. And part of it is just, I remember once doing some of the math behind, do I have enough perfume to wear for the rest of my lifetime? And funny thing is I do, and I have some extra. I have some extra, believe it or not. I was shocked.
A little bit.
Yeah, I was shocked. And when I thought about it that way, I realized, like, my God, dude, please take it. Take. So yes, anyone. I mean, strangers on the street who came in and were interested in perfume, I would say, here, I'd like you to try this and spray it. So absolutely, it's open to them to smell. Yes, indeed.
And talking about spreading the love, is there a particular note that you can reliably or that can be reliably called upon to make you happy? Just one note.
Been called upon to make me happy. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to surprise myself a little with this one and say, it's probably going to be rose, which is, I'm going to say it's a little bit odd because I would have said that a decade ago, and then I'm rethinking it now. And there was a period of time where I wouldn't have said that. And now I feel like I've sort of come full circle and I realize, yeah, I really, really do love the smell of rose. And maybe part of that is that I don't wear rose perfumes terribly often. I think I probably maybe just a few times a month I'll pull out the odd rose perfume, but I'm always surprised at how it elicits all those good associations for me. It's always sunny, it's always bright, it's always positive. There's always positive associations for rose. Yeah.
Adam, over to you for that one.
Yeah, I think my mind went to clary sage first. And I should denote what I mean is like actually the natural material clary sage. I say that just because sometimes I find like clary sage accords can be a little screechy, but when I know that a perfumer has used some natural clary sage in their composition, I just tend to love it. A great example would be a couple of the Parfums de Cita fragrances. Isara and Erewhon use, as far as I'm aware, some pretty high doses of that material. I'm a big coumarin fan. So yeah, things like that. I tend to be, hugely in love with. It's like that semi-sweet, semi-bitter, very herbal kind of smell.
And what about particular notes that make you sad?
Sad notes. Rose can be sad to me as well as happy. Narcissus is an interesting. I wouldn't say it's sad, but it's reflective for me. It can be a bit nostalgic. Same thing with any fragrance that smells like old like 90s era suntan lotions or like sunscreen. Again, it's not like a sadness, but it's like a intense feeling of nostalgia that I feel is related to sadness.
Yeah. John, let's bash that question over to you.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question, and I'd almost want to like really think deeply on it, but I won't now. I remember once there's two things that came to my mind. So one is there's kind of an odd note in perfume. It's not used very often, and I'm not even sure I haven't smelled this as an isolated material, so I've just smelled the accord, but I've noticed the note of papyrus in certain perfumes, and I think it hasn't Guillaume used a couple in
Mm.
some of his perfumes, and it has that, it's sort of that rooty, dusty green kind of herbal smell that but it's a damp sort of a smell too that I find there's something melancholic about that, but also, violet for me. Violet is a very, I know for some people it's like the brightest of the sort of petite flowers or spring flowers, but it has a certain quality that speaks of like far past and also like I don't know, maybe I make associations of like um I don't know. There's something about it that's rather melancholy and sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So now we're gonna do a
Mm.
little bit of a quick fire into your collection. Um.
Uh,
So John, can you name a rose perfume that you think's really good?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, it's discontinued, but if you can find this baby, it is just magic. And that would be and maybe they'll bring it back. They might. It was the Comme des Garçons Red series. And part of it was sequoia, and there was a pepper, one of the, I think, or a pimento, and there was a rose. And what I recommend this so highly, I can't tell you how fantastic it is. But for a non-discontinued one, I would say Majesta Rose, I think it's Majesta Rose by Serge Lutin is also just a beautiful, rich, but also very bright and citrusy kind of a rose as well. So those two I would highly recommend.
Yeah. Adam, over to you.
Another discontinued one, although I think they might be bringing it back soon outside of the US, is Atelier Cologne's Rose and Anime. Love that one. It's for me, it's like that perfect balance of like jammy rose, but some sense of naturalism, some sense of like dewiness and brightness to balance that out. And it has a satisfying woody tone in the background. It's just a perfect fragrance for me. A non-discontinued one that I kind of just thought of, John, is John's Owen Bervuvu.
No.
I know it's more of a cedar study, but the counterpoint is rose, and I think it's a delightful counterpoint. I've always loved the rose note in that.
Adam, what's the weirdest perfume in your collection?
Oh, it's probably something like 20 Mars 2022 by Rundholz. That's pretty weird. I mean, I think it's very perfumey in a way, for lack of a better term. I think you can. What I mean by that is, I think you can recognize that it's a fragrance and recognize that it's not one of those fragrances that's like so out there as to be a non-fragrance smell, but it is a weird fragrance. Um, but it's probably got to be that. I can't think of one that's weirder in my collection.
Fair enough. John?
Oh, okay. There's a couple of pretty weird ones. I'm saying, basically, those. You know, I would say, the first one that came to mind, because it's very hard to wear, which I think is a pretty good indication of weirdness. Has gotten people, I think the audience will agree on this one, because it seems to be consensus, is Orto Parisi's Mega Mare. That is just, it's the most, it's the strongest aquatic perfume that almost seems to have been deliberately created to be a real pain in the ass, if or butt. I'm sorry for politely here. It's an industrial aquatic, and it's fascinating to study as a kind of, to create almost like a true alien sort of perfume. Um, I can wear maybe half of a spray in order. That's about all that I can actually fathom. But it's metallic and weird and indecipherable. Yeah, that's my weirdest.
Mm. How far have you travelled to pick up a fragrance?
That's interesting. In terms of the U.S., I've certainly crossed multiple state lines to do that, and in one go. So, I believe, that that's a really good question. I think that I think that I took a journey that was over 3 hours by car to pick up a fragrance. Yeah, I know I definitely did. I took about 3 to 4 hour car trip to pick up a fragrance. Yes, if I hope that explains. But that's commitment right
Yeah.
there. Definitely.
How about you?
Yes.
Yeah, not just for the sake of picking up a fragrance. I've taken like work trips where I knew I was also going to look for a fragrance. Like I went to Amsterdam a few times for work a few years back, and every time I went for that same work trip every year, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to that perfume shop in Amsterdam. So that's for me living in New England. That's far. That's an ocean away, and then some. But just for the sake of a trip solely dedicated to picking up a fragrance, probably one state line,
Mm.
which in New England is actually not typically that far.
Yeah.
What scent reminds you of holidays?
I have a fragrance by Slumber House called Norn, Norne. That is, I think, for many people who love that that fragrance reminds them of the holidays because it's sort of that fir tree Christmassy smell with some incense and spicy notes. So it's bound to kind of skew that way a little bit. Um, some of the Serge Lutens fragrances kind of skew that way for me. The La Participe Pass, I think, is a great fragrance that I tend to wear around the holidays.
John?
There's a lot. So, wow. I would say there was one that was just in my mind a minute. Oh, yeah. There's one that was probably my first fragrance that I sprayed and I thought, oh, this is, sort of Christmas in a bottle type of thing. And that is Elixir de Merveille by Hermes. And I really like the Merveille collection generally, and they have that kind of snow globe feel to the bottle, which is kind of a holiday-ish feel already. But it has those particularly interesting notes of orange and caramel, as we mentioned before. But there's like a sandalwoodish, base to it, which adds this really buttery smell as well too. And to me, like the holidays are often about baking and butter. But that smell of butter is very just like, wow, it's like a big pie or something. So that to me is very much about holidays. But then holidays from the perspective of like, if you think of like vacation and that type of holidays, I would say, in fact, I think Nicola, you wrote recently about the brand there's a Spanish brand, you wrote recently about
Eulalia?
Santa Eulalia, right? And they have a perfume that just smells exactly like suntan lotion, which is fantastic. And I bought it just like after one smell. I'm like that, and it'll probably make you sad, Adam, but oh my God, this is glorious. It's the most suntanish, lotionish perfume ever in the world. And
Which one was
just,
that?
I can't remember. I think it's called Alba, possibly. It's just off the charts, suntan lotion. It's just pure poetry of simple poetry of suntan lotion. But that to me is like more of that kind of genre.
Brilliant. What are you wearing most frequently at the moment?
For me, so yeah, this is interesting because I bought a fragrance which I would not have ever pegged that this would be my like go-to, but this has been my go-to lately, and that's Sandalo by Santa Maria Novella. And it's just one of these fantastic things that you can wear anywhere, anytime, and it's a very herbal approach to sandalwood. It's very simple. It's sort of like the smell of thyme leaves plus sandalwood. That's pretty much what it is. And maybe I think there's a little bit of clary sage possibly in it, or or it's got that sort of aggressive, outdoorsy green smell combined with sandalwood. But it's fantastic. It's light enough that it gets you through a day, but then it persists as well on skin in a very nice kind of background kind of way, but that's I've reached for constantly.
Adam?
I realized that I was able to have an objective answer to this by looking at my perfume timeline on Fragrantica. And my top three are Aqua Sextius, not surprising at all, given I wrote that review. I've been wearing a lot from One Day because I'm writing about them, but also it's one of those houses that, I love. I usually only tend to write about what I really like or find, or at least if I don't like it, I find it compelling and, something I'd be eager to talk about for Fragrantica. And this is one of those houses that I both love and feel is interesting and worth writing about. So it's One Day. The specific fragrance I've been wearing a lot by them is Oolong Tea. And then Alfred Sung Home, which is, you were just talking, John, about a scent that is suntan lotion to you. This is soap. This is soap that's been drizzled in shower gel. And just those two things. But it's so nice. It's so, it's refreshing. It makes my brain feel happy.
That's amazing.
Brilliant. If you could only wear the fragrances of one brand for the rest of your life, which brand would you pick? I think I might know your answer, Adam.
Probably do. I mean, it's probably got to be Pierre Guillaume because I'm looking in my collection right now and it's like I own like 9 or 10 compositions from him if you count Faden. But yeah, it's probably them. I think if we can extend that question for a second to cover like houses that are really great to choose from, if you wanted an answer to that question and don't know where to begin, I think you can do a lot worse than J Scent.
Yeah.
They have a scent for pretty much every like occasion.
What about you, John? I've got a feeling I've got an inkling of yours as well.
Yeah, you probably. Yeah, I mean, no big secrets there, really. I if I could extend it to 2. I mean, it's funny. My first answer was going to be, and it's just based on the numbers, right? Is there's a ton, because I just have tons of, and I wear their perfumes a lot. I mean, I really do, and they've been associated with a lot of important parts of my life. And anyway, it fits a lot of bills, for me. But I'm also going to say, and this is no surprise either, is that I reach for constantly a Goutal, and realize that they also, kind of run this incredibly full range of everything from some of the most iconic citrus perfumes and woody perfumes to some of the darkest, deepest ambers as well, and like everything in between is some like beautiful transparent florals, and so I suppose that the versatility of what a particular perfume house offers kind of plays into this quite a bit. So it isn't so much that I like a particular perfume house because it does a thing I like, but because they give me a lot of options. Me part of that answer.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to try and do some, if I can get my brain to work enough for this. So, John, we'll stick with you for this one.
Sure.
Spicy or sweet scents?
Spicy.
Spicy or woody? Yeah, you again.
Woody.
Woody or floral?
Floral.
Floral or floral generic or floral tuberose?
Floral generic.
Floral generic or floral rose?
Floral rose.
Rose or cedarwood?
Rose.
Rose or sandalwood?
Sandalwood.
Sandalwood or pink pepper?
Pink pepper.
Yeah. Pink pepper or black pepper?
Pink pepper.
Pink pepper or oud?
Oh, tough one. I'm still going to stick with pink pepper.
Of course you are. Pink pepper or vetiver?
Pink pepper, still.
Pink pepper or bergamot?
Oh. Pink pepper, still. Holding those cards.
Pink pepper or lemon?
Pink pepper.
Yeah. We can relax now because we're going to do that to Adam.
Tough
I'm
one.
excited.
That was good, but
Adam, spicy or sweet? And you're not allowed two answers to this one.
Spicy. Spicy for sure.
Spicy or woody?
Spicy.
Spicy or floral?
Oh no. I saw it coming too. And I'm still so surprised. Spicy.
Spicy or tuberose?
Spicy.
Spicy or rose?
Spicy.
Spicy or cedar?
Spicy.
Spicy or sandalwood?
Spicy.
Spicy or pink pepper?
Spicy.
Spicy or black pepper?
Spicy.
I think we might have found Adam's winner here. Spicy or oud?
Spicy.
Spicy or vetiver?
Spicy.
Spicy or bergamot?
Spicy. I've never said this word so many times in one go.
Spicy or lemon?
Spicy.
Yay, spicy wins.
It was
It's
cruel
weak.
to go between that and floral, by the way.
Yeah,
I wanted
that
to.
was mad, wasn't it?
yeah.
If you had to if you had to get rid of one perfume ingredient, which one would you pick? Adam.
Tuberose.
Oh, really? John?
You just asked a perfumer this. It's such a cruel.
Yeah, it's one. How you? Oh God. This is going to be could continue controversial, but jasmine.
Whoa.
It's quite
fascinating.
controversial.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, in the spirit of getting through the rest of my questions, I'm now going to alternate between you. So look at the draw as to what you get. So John, will stick with you. What's the most modern or futuristic smelling fragrance that you've ever smelt?
Oh, there's futuristic. God. Oh gosh. Okay, hold on. Uh. I would say, I think it's well, it's a tough question because uh, Kenzo's Jungle Elephant, I think, is so crazily off the wall and so sort of daring in its whole premise that I heard for years people talk about, oh, this is such a wacky fragrance. And then I finally got some and smelled it. Like, this thing is nuts. Is it absolutely freaking nuts? And it was a mainstream perfume. So I suppose in that context, yes, it absolutely modern and crazy. Yes, that's my answer.
Adam, what do you think the future will smell like more generally?
I think more. Hopefully more green.
Fair enough. John, what smell or fragrance, you can either have fragrance or note actually, smells comforting?
You comforting, I would say, I've noticed some perfumes that, it's a pretty niche kind of thing, and it's a note or an accord, but I've noticed a trend in a few perfumes to combine the smell of tea with like kind of more of a gourmand, like a food type of thing. So sort of almost like like a biscuit and tea or something like that. And I've always found that particular coupling, and I know like Sarah McCartney's done one, and there's a couple of other perfumers that have done that. It unquar- unquestionably is like an invitation to pause, and stop and smell and just like, calm down. And I think that's extremely comforting as a note. Yeah.
Adam, are there any fragrances that you thought were definitely worth the hype they received?
Yeah. A recent one for me, Clementine Dream from from the Seven Virtues. I'll be reviewing that shortly. It was one of these things that's sold in the mass market, sold in Sephora only, I believe. And lots of people talking about them. I really enjoyed it. Thought it was a delightful bronzy musk vanilla.
Mm. John, what scents did your mum or dad wear?
Interesting. So my dad would wear, I think with him, it was more like he just wore things very loudly. He wore too much, but, I remember he, particularly wore, I got to come back to dad because I got to think about that one. But my mother, there was a few that she absolutely loved, and she loved, Coco, by Chanel. She loved, Venezia was a perfume in the 90s that she absolutely loved. Chanel Cristal she wore. And she wore, Jean Patou Joy, the original Joy, I remember she wore as well. So she was a real perfume fan, and she wore my dad. Oh, I remember the first Yves Saint Laurent for men, that first one, which was a fairly strong fragrance, as I recall. He wore, and he really wore the hell out of that one.
Brilliant. Adam, can you tell us about a strong scent memory that you have?
Oh, did a couple earlier. How about another one? Yes. My mom used to make this spice cake. It was like an oatmeal spice cake. And so the combination of like a little molasses, a little spice, because, she's Irish. She's not going to put a ton of spices in it. But yeah, just like a little spice, a little like gingery, kind of cinnamony kind of spice. Kind of like the allspice smell, but I don't think she used it. And it's like in a cake, but it's not too sweet of a cake. And it has a vanilla cream cheese frosting. So that's a nostalgic memory smell for me.
That sounds nice. John, I'm going to ask you the same question there. Have you got a strong scent memory you want to share with us?
Yeah, I do. Uh, I recall I grew up in a very large sort of park area. My dad was a landscaper at a park in Connecticut, and we used to kind of just have a lot of room to run around in as a child growing up. And so summers had lots of smells, and I have a lot of summer smell memories. But I recall, specifically there was a pond in this area that we used to just like play around a lot in, and just there, it's a kind of a combination of a lot of the things growing in this pond, and the really strong heat, and it was near an apple orchard. So, I just remember like kind of the smell of apples, the smells of the pond, that kind of sense of the things growing in the chloroform, and just like everything growing, and in the summer having a smell, and that being a really strong part of my childhood. And uh it's very botanical, and it's very much about like things growing. And so that I'm not getting as specific as you might want, but that is still very much alive in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another one that I'm going to put to both of you. Do you have a method for testing out a new fragrance or a new brand? Adam, let's start with you.
Yes, I've written extensively about my method. My method is I want a sort of stationary location on my body. I try not to do unless I'm dressed for a specific occasion for work or something or for the day. I try not to test things on my hand or wrist. I try to go for a stationary location like the chest, peer, because it's there and it's a consistent distance more or less from my nose because most of the day I have my head up. So anytime I try a new fragrance, I try it a couple of times on the chest before I move to any other location. And I find that it works for me pretty well. I also tend to only use like a couple sprays max for the first time I try any scent as a baseline, like one or two sprays, and that's it. Try to be pretty consistent with that for myself.
Yeah. What about you, John?
Yeah, I've arrived at a method which is rather funny because I have a glass desk, glass top, clear glass desk, and which is great for creating a sense of space because you can see through, and it doesn't like obfuscate your view. one of the problems though is that I, normally spray on the inside of my arms, but as soon as you put your arms down on a glass desk with perfume, there's just these awful smears that appear. And I'm like, God. And of course, it happens on a wooden desk too, but you don't see it, and so it's a bit psychological. Anyway, so for testing, and if I'm going to be at my desk, I now spray the tops of my arms. But even before I do that, I will first spray on paper strips. So there's paper strip containers everywhere around me, and I do an assessment on paper, then I do an assessment on skin, and I make notes between the two. And usually there are some differences. And that I would say it can take me a while, but I'm glad that I've reached a place now though where it doesn't have to take forever to assess a fragrance. Like, and I think that's actually kind of important, that you shouldn't need a month to be able to learn about a perfume, write about it. That's almost too much.
Great. Are there any scented products that are not perfume that you would recommend, John?
Oh gosh. Okay. Scented products that are not perfume that I would recommend. Yes. So I'm kind of laughing because I really like scented things. Like, scented things are cool. I think they're really cool. And so I'm thinking, like, what don't I like that's scented, right? But I'm thinking of one very peculiar thing that I really like. I guess that there's a novelty factor here, which is fun, that I think you can get away with more things, scented products, than maybe you can with perfume, because you kind of really are, you're devoting a lot when you put it on your skin and you're going to wear it and stuff. Like a candle, you can get away with more because you can, put it aside, or, there's a great product made by Malin and Getz, which is an American kind of apothecary brand. And it's a tomato scented candle. And this thing is just so freaking good. It is so good. It is so, so good. And you might be thinking, what does it smell like, tomato sauce or something? But no, it's really got that whole verdant, like the fruit and the leaves and everything kind of a fragrance. And it smells like a garden. And it's great to bring the smell of a garden indoors. Yes, I totally recommend the tomato gallon by Malin and Getz.
Brilliant. Thank you. Adam, do you ever layer fragrances?
Not generally. Not generally. I like, I spend so much of my time writing about perfume that, I tend to just one after another kind of thing, but I'd be open to doing more.
John, how do you feel about great scents that have really short longevity?
I think that there's a place for them in our world. There's a place for them in our world, and they're interesting. It is funny, isn't it, that becomes a facet of their, like, we know them for that. Like a perfect example, and it's mentioned all the time, and I have it, is Sicily's Eau de Campagne, which is that really bright green, completely green scent, and I think it lasts 2 hours max. It lasts 2 hours, and I love it. I love it. It is the kind of thing though that you got to plan for it. Like, you will not smell it after 2 hours. So if you put it on at 9, at 11, you better have a backup.
Love it. Adam, does the bottle a scent come in ever put you off?
Certainly. Yeah, I'll generally still try it, but, we've all been to a perfume shop here. I feel like we all know that we've probably passed over some bottles that maybe we discovered later and thought, oh, this is actually really good. And you don't even know for a moment why you didn't try it. I think probably it has to do with the fact that the bottle didn't jump out at you.
So sticking with you then, Adam, what's an ugly bottle?
Oh, I don't want to like put down like an independent house, but that one from, is it Sarah Baker with like the eyelashes? I just don't like anything, it could be outside of perfume too. I'm sorry, Sarah. Like, it could be outside of perfume too. It's like anything that has like, and I know it's camp, right? But if it's like an inanimate object and it like highly like eyelashed or like it's a little uncanny valley sort of situation. It's just kind of like, no, no thanks.
That scent of Sarah's, I think, is at the eyelash bottle is a limited edition bottle as well. So you can also get that scent in a non-eyelash version.
Oh, that's good to know. That's
I'm
good to
also
know.
quite glad there was a bit of a trend here, maybe about 10 years ago, for people putting eyelashes on their car headlights. And that used to creep me out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me. So I have a great a secondary answer to this if you don't mind. I have a bottle from oh, I have it right here. Melancholic called Damon, right? And my bottle doesn't have the little tail. I think I swapped for it, so I don't have the little tail with it that came with it. But like it's they have artistic bottles. Like I love the craft that goes into most of the Melancholic scents bottles,
Mm.
but like I just like I don't need a tail. Like I don't want like a little fuzzy thing trailing off of something that I have to like keep track of or make sure a cat doesn't get. Like I just don't need that. So I'm personally very glad that my bottle, like I remember like they have like different animal on different versions of the bottle with different like caps. And that my cap is like a bird or something. And I was so glad because I was like, oh, I wanted like the owl. Like I wanted the bird. So I don't have like the little tail.
Fair enough. John, what do you think is an attractive bottle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about what are some of the qualities that make a bottle attractive, and I think they're they're pretty personal. Like certain aesthetic things that one likes, and I know that I like bottles that have a very good feel in the hand, and I guess that's a good analog would be something like, the kind of mouth feel for words or for tastes or something like that, that feels right. And I think bottles can feel right in your hand, and
I'm just
that
imagining
also
you now just putting bottles in your mouth all the time. No, that's not.
feels terrible,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, certain bottles have a certain quality to them that I like, and I guess it's very much a know it when I see it. And having said that, I was thinking about there's a bottle in front of me which I really like, and I noticed that I gravitate toward this a lot. But this was when Obiga re-released Fushar Bengal. And I often hate clever bottles. Like this has a basket weave motif on the front, which normally if you told me about that, I would have said like, oh, that sounds like kind of tacky. It's not at all though. It actually is very like kind of cool looking. And I think the feel of this bottle, the proportions of it, the kind of frosted glass and all that, it just feels right.
Mm.
So, yeah, it usually has to come down to certain kind of proportions, and I don't mind a little bit of cleverness, but don't be too clever.
Mm.
Oh God, don't be that drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adam, what scent have you found disappointing?
I have the perfect response. Oh, you've gotten me going here. The Basilic Porpe from Hermes. Oh my word! I was so disappointed by it. It felt very. No, listen. I don't normally talk like this about fragrance, but just like forgive it. It was spineless. I was so mad at it. I just smelled it and I was like, this is so boring. This is so generic smelling. What is this? This part of their collection ought to be, impactful and like, or at the very least, vivid. It was none of the above. And spineless was the word that I kept coming. I was in like a mood cloud about it for a solid day. I was so excited. It sounded right up my alley.
Yeah, you and I were talking about, I think, actually, Adam.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know
amazing.
it's like, or somebody hyped it up, and I
Yeah.
remember getting it, and I was just like, spineless was the word, and I was just going about the upstairs in my house that day, like, how dare they? This is so boring. This is so bad. What did they do? Like, I was so pissed off about it.
Well, I'm
Amazing.
glad I asked you now.
I had a lot of feelings about the last one. I remember I've never felt so grumpy about a fragrance, but I was just like, this is so up my street. And then it just certainly wasn't.
Mm. Moving on. John, have you ever dropped and smashed a bottle?
Interesting. This is a very interesting story. So I did not personally drop it. However, one fell somehow mysteriously. Right, which is
All of
like
your mistakes were made.
something happened, right? And it was when I was packing to move. Actually, it was packing to move here. And what's so funny is that it was possibly one of the loudest and strongest bottles, and it's also now become discontinued. I wasn't to get a bottle to replace it, but the one that I had, this was one of the loudest perfumes I own, and that is New York Oud by Bond Number 9, which is notorious for being one of just the loudest fragrances out there. And I remember it fell during the night, and I woke up as if in a fever dream, like, what's happening? Is the place on fire or something? And it had fallen out of a shelf in the bathroom, which is kind of odd. I don't normally put stuff in there, into the sink. So like maximum, like hard surface to hard surface, glass everywhere. Like, it was terrible. And it, luckily I was moving out, so I was already scrubbing surfaces because I had to leave. But yeah, that was yeah. So the answer is yes, and it was pretty.
I thought you were going to say for a minute then. Luckily, I was moving out, so I just left it. No problem now.
Problem solved. Yeah.
Imagine if that was somebody's origin story for how they came upon perfume, and they actually
Right. It was the smell of this place I moved into.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Adam, how often do you repurchase a scent when you've finished a bottle of it?
Oh, okay. So not often, because I don't tend to finish bottles very often. And I think the reason for that is one, ADD, and two, I have so many samples, and like I try to like stay in, even during that like less productive period over the last like a year ago, like where I wasn't doing too much for Fragrantica. I was still trying to smell like samples of stuff just to kind of keep in touch. And, especially now that I'm back in it, I don't really finish a lot of bottles. I think I don't wear like the stuff that I have as often as I wear stuff that I want to explore and write about, And I think that's a problem. So I want to finish a bottle. And I think the first bottle I want to finish is Mem from Bogué, because it's one of my all-time favorites. And I already made a pretty decent dent in it. So I'm aiming to finish that one, but I don't finish them very often.
When you finish that one, will you repurchase it though?
Oh, absolutely. I'll never be without a bottle of that.
Great. And this is one I'm going to put to both of you, but we'll start with John. What discontinued perfume, just one, I'm going to hold you both to just one on this answer. What one discontinued perfume would you like to bring back?
Okay. Give me a minute. Okay. I would say, okay. I had an answer, but it was brought with my wish was granted. So that's one taken off there. There is one which I really loved, and it's been discontinued. It should be brought back, and that's Bouillon by Byredo, which is a really beautiful, subtle perfume for them, but it was kind of from that, I see sort of like an earlier golden age of Byredo before they kind of have gotten a little more very, very consumer friendly, which is okay, but it's not as special. They were very niche before. And I remember I put together, I helped to edit a group article about Byredo, and was really excited to write about Bouillon, and it was discontinued. I was like, God damn, you're making this harder for me, guys. And that was kind of a shame. So I would love to see that come back. Yeah, that's one that I really liked.
Adam, what about you for this one?
It's another Byredo, Green from Byredo. Oh, that one, you know what? Let's storm the castles. Let's storm the Byredo castles. We have to make this happen. It was so good. It was so good.
It was good. Great answer, Adam. That was such a good one.
I'm going to answer this one as well because I just want to put it out
Please.
there in case the universe wants to, manifest it. Narja by Vero Profumo. I don't think there's much chance of it coming back because the founder of the house is no longer with us, but such a
Right.
cracking perfume, so good.
Yeah.
Anyway, right, last two questions, and I think we'll you can both do an answer to them. So first one, if you could go back and smell any historical era, where would you go and what would you smell, Adam?
I think it'd be really interesting to like do the proto eau de colognes, from like 1800s and before, like maybe 1700s, like those like proto, like just the type of stuff that like every village had their perfumer, and every perfumer had like their take on this concept of like the refreshing, gentlemanly, like put it on your gloves, put it on your person, smell nice on a hot day. That whole like eau de cologne history thing, I think would be very interesting to smell.
Yeah. John, what about you?
I'm sort of fascinated by pre-colonial periods of more obscure places on the earth. So I went down a rabbit hole about the history of Hawaii, and what an interesting sort of kingdom it was prior to colonialization and all of the plantations that ended up growing there, and you get this sense of just the rarity of species and plants and that existed, and the kind of what we would consider a kind of paradise and a olfactive paradise, and so I feel like they're particularly a place like Hawaii, which has just had such a large amount of fauna and flora in such a small place. So anywhere you turn, there's like a rare bird, a rare plant, a rare flower, lava fields, all this craziness around, and ocean. So I feel like that, sort of like late 18th century, would have just been a wild place to smell historically, Yeah,
Yeah.
that's for me.
So then, sticking with you, John, if you could go and
Yeah.
smell any fantasy world, where would you go and what would you smell?
Oh my good. Oh wow, that's a really tough one, isn't it? I suppose that, I'm going to stick with something that's a little bit something I know. So I'll stick within our solar system. So that's actually not fantasy world per se, but I suppose it is fantasy world because we literally can't stand in these places. We vapor. I'm very curious about things like, moons of Jupiter, for instance, like, I'm, you see these little specks and you hear these statistical things about like there's this much ammonia in the atmosphere and all that. And I was like, oh, what does it smell like? Right. That's gotta have an interesting smell, right? If you're able to stand on that little part of that little Jupiter moon, and also just that weird, it can be pretty isolated out there as well. It's going to be cold, But anyway, I suppose it's some of those obscure specks in space within our solar system, and particularly like Neptune and Jupiter moons, I think are probably where I would land.
Cool. Adam, what about you?
Yeah.
Where would you go?
It's a similar thing insofar as the place exists and you can go there, but I'm imagining it through the lens of media and authorship. Magical realism, Columbia. So my brain went to 100 Years of Solitude, and and then I kind of connected that with a more modern creation of the movie Encanto, the Disney film Encanto. Which I think obviously kind of borrowed a couple of ideas and just sort of obviously the setting of magical realism set in Colombia, but like similar to what John said about like these subtropical places like Hawaii, Colombia. I've been to Costa Rica a couple of times and similar area of the world kind of, and so like in terms of like flora and fauna. So there's that, but like imagined through the lens of like a time or an ability for like magic to happen in, and like not the literal place, but the imagined place of the writers and the author associated with these two pieces of media, I think is an interesting fantasy.
Brilliant. Well, guys, that reaches the end of my questions. Thank you so much for playing along. It was really interesting for me to hear some of your answers, even if most of you did give 2 answers for every question, which is something.
We're so
But
bad at that. John and I, here I was thinking I was really good at this. Like, well, you rules, John, but no, it's
I should have expected it. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you again to our listeners and viewers. And we'll see you again on the next episode of Fragrantica Talks.